Now there's all kinds of different people in this world. There's only one pie.
Welcome to the Team Made Apart podcast, the podcast designed to teach freelancers, contractors, and remote workers, really anyone working apart, how to build better relationships with those they work with and those they work for. I'm your host, Ryan Rogar. Before we get started, financial support for the Team Made Apart podcast is provided by R2, a fully distributed brand relationship consultancy. R2 has specific expertise and experience in helping service companies grow, develop, and maintain impactful relationships through world-class brand strategy and design. R2 supports the world's best distributed companies by providing valuable insights, strategy, empathy, and tactical expertise to help them foster truly meaningful relationships from top management to top consumer. If the success of your business depends on the relationships you make, then you need R2. To learn more or to request a call, simply visit r2mg.com/podcast. That's r2mg.com/podcast. R2, relationships squared. Also, financial support comes from teammadeapart.com. Leveraging 20 plus years of global agency and creative hiring expertise, Team Made Apart provides distributed organizations with access to the best and brightest creative talent from around the world. Through deep understanding of client needs and meaningful relationships with talent, Team Made Apart facilitates a sort of virtual handshake between prospective employer and prospective employee to reduce risk and eliminate doubt from creative hiring decisions. Take a step towards filling that creative-shaped void in your distributed team by visiting teammadeapart.com/talent. That's teammadeapart.com/talent to learn more. Finally, financial support comes from supporters like you. Members of our Happy Little Podcast community can make contributions directly to the show by visiting teammadeapart.com/podcast and clicking on the donation link. Donations can be made in any amount and would go a long way towards keeping this show on the air. If you appreciate the work we're doing and would like to get involved, just visit teammadeapart.com/podcast, click the donate button, and you're on your way. Thanks in advance for your continued support. And now, on to the show. Hi there, and welcome back to the Team Made Apart podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to have joining me special guest, Tony Jamous. Tony is a software entrepreneur and investor, and presently the CEO at Oyster, a mission-driven HR company that makes it easy for companies to hire, make locally compliant payroll, and offer great benefits to their full-time employees around the world. They accomplish this via their distributed talent enablement platform that allows growing companies to tap into the global talent pool and offer their distributed teams worldwide a great employment experience. We have a lot of ground to cover, so let's dive right in. Joining the show today to discuss the myriad of issues involved in trying to hire across borders the right way, insights and trends that remote leaders and companies should be aware of, what it means to build a truly purpose-driven company, and how they make it possible for people in developing parts of the world to engage with global economies. Please join me in welcoming to the show the incredible Tony Jamous. Hey, Tony, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Hey, Ryan. Thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. Thrilled to death to have you. Well, I've been trying to get into the habit because, all the remote work podcasts are doing this these days. But where are you calling in from today?
Currently, I'm calling from London, UK.
Excellent. Well, that's awesome. And hopefully we don't end up with any connectivity problems. I will say that the one funny thing that happens just based on the time difference and when we're talking, it's funny when I speak to European people as you can sort of see the sun begin to set. It's worse in the winter months, but you can sort of see the sun set. So it looks kind of like a time lapse video on the other end. It's kind of fun. So cool.
Yeah. Welcome to the world of multi-time zone.
Yeah, right. So I love it. Well, and we actually do a lot of work in Spain, and I think you're 1 hour closer than they are in the UK, but it's very similar, in terms of what the sun is doing. So it's pretty entertaining. Let's go ahead and start, I guess, kind of at the beginning. Let's talk a little bit about who you are and what got you into this space. Obviously, you're a multi-time entrepreneur and exiter. But at some point you were brought into sort of what is now this remote space. So can we talk a little bit about that transition as sort of an entrepreneur in the tech space into remote work?
Sure. So let's start with the beginning. I was born in Lebanon in 1980, and I spent 17 years of my life in this country. And I had this amazing opportunity when I was 17 to go to France and study computer science. That enabled me to be plugged into Western world economy, and I My first company I started was 10, 11 years ago called Nexmo. That was an API business for building communication applications. And what we've done is we've lowered the barriers to entry for software developers to innovate with communication technologies. And as a result of that, we grew really fast. We actually reached $100 million of revenue in less than 5 years, and then took the company public by merging with Vonage on the Nasdaq. And I stayed there for a couple of years, and I left. I took some time off. And more recently, in mid 2019, I decided I want to do another company. And I wasn't sure what kind of company I would do. What I was certain of is that this company is going to be a globally distributed company pre-pandemic. And why is that? Because Nexmo, although we had HQ in San Francisco and in London, we hired folks in over 45 different countries. And I came to that realization that A, great talent can be found anywhere. B, you can really make a difference in people's life when you hire them, especially in emerging economies. And C, company culture trumps local country culture. So you really don't have a problem in bringing people from anywhere in the world to help you build your business. So that was my conviction that whatever company I'll do, it's going to be a globally distributed company. But then we really struggled at Nexmo to do so and provide a great employee experience to these folks in 45 different countries. We had to set up entities, hire lawyers, accountant, payroll provider, benefit providers. We probably spent a few $1 million on building our own internal employment infrastructure, but we failed. We failed to provide that great experience because the world is very complex. The world of employment varies from country to country, and one company on its own cannot really deal with that. So I started looking for solutions. How can I solve this problem? And to my surprise, back in mid 2019, there were no solutions to that problem. What I found instead is this industry that is called employer of record. Well, in the US, they call it professional employer organizations. And these are more like professional services organization that comes and hires somebody on your behalf compliantly on this other side of the world. And it costs a fortune. It costs up to 15, 20% of the salary, and it's very labor intensive, very paperwork intensive. So if you're let's say Twitter, and you want to hire your country manager in Egypt, then you pay probably $2,000 per month to make sure that the compliance problem is taken care of. But if you're a startup like me and you want to hire people from all over the world because you want to acquire talent quickly and easily, then you cannot use them. But what I really found that industry that was ready for software disruption. It was fragmented, it was expensive, it was analog. So I said, actually, this is interesting. This could be another big business. But I said, why me? Why should I do it myself? As you probably know, Ryan, I'm an angel investor, so I could go and invest in similar businesses. It's really when I realized that if you make it as easy to hire somebody on the other side of the world and hiring your neighbor, then you can actually potentially change the world. You can reduce wealth inequality. You can reduce brain drain. Great talent don't have to leave their home country. Mohammed in Egypt, this brilliant software developer, can stay in Egypt, but then work for the best companies in the world that happen to be in the Western world. So that kind of mission, I felt that was really important for me, where I came from, to go and close some of that opportunity gap. And that's why I realized that I had to do Oyster. I wanted to do Oyster. And that's the story, right?
Yeah, no, I love that. And I'm glad that you pointed out the fact that you were of Lebanese descent. I think that, obviously for a lot of people, the story of the person who comes from another country and then finds success in America and Europe and other places. This entrepreneurial story is very inspirational on its own. But I think one of the things that I love the most about Oyster, and even in the months prior to this call, for example, I've been learning about Oyster. I've been talking with people in your company, for example, and I've really come to grow be pretty affectionate for your company, and strictly for the reason that you were very purpose driven. The company itself has got this ethos of, making the world a better place, but for reals. Like, we're not just paying lip service to this idea. Rather, the company was founded with those ideals. And so I wondered if maybe, can you speak to sort of, I guess, where that comes from? I mean, was it as a result of your upbringing that you felt like it's on you to change the world in this way, or where does that motivation come from?
Yeah, that motivation come from the fact that whatever I wanted to do post my previous exit, is that it has to be aligned with what I believe in. Otherwise, I wouldn't be motivated to do it. And what I believe in is that we have this concept of country that is responsible for most of the inequalities we see in the world today. And when I look back home, we have brilliant people from family and friends that went to great universities, but the best job they can get if they are the brilliant graduate in their university is to go find a job in their local bank. And they are dependent on their local economy. And they plateau. 5 years in the job, they wouldn't have the growth opportunity that we enjoy in the West. So it was a great learning for me that the human capital is being compressed in many emerging economies because they don't have access to the opportunity. But at the same time, according to BCG, you have 80 million jobs, a knowledge worker job, going unfulfilled in the Western world in the next 10 years. Leading to $10 trillion economic loss. So if you create a platform that can bridge that gap between these unfulfilled jobs in the Western world and the great talent in emerging economies, by the way, there's 1.5 billion knowledge worker coming to workforce in the same time in the next 10 years. Then you can really solve the problem. And not to mention that immigration barriers are increasing. More and more people in the world will be restricted to move country to country because of these immigration barriers. So it was very clear to me that a platform that reduces the barriers to cross-border employment and make smart companies, tap into the global talent pool would make a big difference.
Yeah, no, I think that's just incredible. And I really do love that bit of, I guess, sort of life experience, right? Fueling this idea about being sort of philanthropic with the work you're doing. I mean, yes, of course you're running a business and you want to generate income too, but if you can do that in a sustainable way at the same time you're improving the lives of all these people, I think it's just an incredible mission and a great thing about the company you're running. I wanted to talk too about just that brief thing that you mentioned there, this idea about people having to jump around from country to country. I work in advertising marketing. I've been doing this for 20 years and we, of course, leverage talent from all over the world in our agency. And, this has been something that I see a lot of, but I've honestly never thought of this component, this part about moving around, right? And how difficult it might be for people to have to abandon families or leave their home behind or whatever it is to chase down a career so that they can provide better for their family or build a better life for themselves. And I wonder, if you could sort of speak to that as somebody who's basically done that themselves, if you can talk a little bit about just the struggles of trying to, as a person, from I guess a disadvantaged part of the world relative to maybe the Western sort of side of the world. I wonder if you could sort of just talk about that experience of having to sort of leave behind what you know in order to chase down opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So to me, what was a struggle the main struggle was this attachment to the land, this connection with the land that you were born in, that I've underestimated that. And the more I grow, the more I realize actually it's real. And it is creating for me a number of emotional challenges in my life that are actually creating a disconnection. And everywhere I go, I feel that I don't fit. That's kind of one of the side effects of that. Until I realized that actually the issue was coming from the fact that I'm missing my land. I'm missing where I was born, and that has a number of kind of mental health issue that we can talk about. And that was my personal journey, but also being leaving your home country and going into a new country with a lot of uncertainty in your life is unhealthy as well. Like, for instance, when I look at my other friends here in Europe or in the US, there is certain level of predictability in their life. They know how the world works around them. For them, it's very predictable, and I mean, it's more predictable. I mean, the world overall is getting less predictable, but at least if you compare these kind of two part of the world, then there's and that sense of predictability creates serenity in people, and therefore reduces their anxiety level, reduces their health issues. I mean, these kind of high stress and high anxiety will lead eventually to physical health issues. So that's kind of my experience, and the experience of many people that had to go through that journey that I know.
Yeah. Well, and maybe that's a great segue then to maybe talk a little bit about just sort of mental health and the mental health implications of working remote. I mean, for a lot of people who are, of course now, especially having, well, hopefully we're coming off the end of COVID. Hopefully things will begin to settle down, sort of worldwide. I know there's still some hot spots out there, but hopefully, we'll start to return to some semblance of, safe enough to go back to work. But there's a lot of people who, I mean, I've sort of been looking at the whole situation as there's remote workers who are remote by choice, and then there's remote workers who were forced into remote. And I think some people might have a little bit better resilience or a little more, mental fortitude, I guess, to get through these challenges than others, right? If you're remote by choice, you might be more, I don't know, maybe you're better able to work alone or something, where if you've never done that before in your entire career, that could be a pretty dramatic moment for you where you're all of a sudden alone. So I'm wondering, maybe not just as it pertains to immigrants exclusively, but as it pertains to maybe all remote workers, or, I wonder if you could share sort of your experience as a leader, as a remote worker yourself, and as a person who supplies and provides a service to other remote working companies. What are you seeing in terms of mental health?
Yeah, definitely, Ryan. We've seen mental health issues going to the roof through the pandemic. I think the last report I've seen is like 50% of workers and remote workers in the US are having some of that challenges. And some say the other half are lying, Yeah. But there are some real challenges with remote work when it comes to mental health. There's a high sense of isolation and loneliness that is creeping in. There's also I call it lack of oxytocin. You're not meeting other people, especially people who are living alone or having to deal with that sense of isolation. There is parents with children that they had to deal with both a very demanding job and also childcare at the same time. And there's also there is also this issue of mistrust between managers and employees, because when managers are used to see their employees in the office, and then when managers that are not equipped to deal with remote work, they start mistrusting their employees because they don't see them, and it's completely unconscious for them. It's not like doing it on purpose. And then that leads to a vicious circle where management mistrust lead to micromanagement, lead to underperformance, and that cycle continues and build up. So people are also feeling that they're not performing well on their job if their managers are trying to micromanage them. So you have all these sort of issues that are making it very, very hard for people to feel good as remote workers. So this is where actually the solution to that is twofold. One is companies really embracing, adopting a remote work environment that is positive for people. So, for instance, to give you an example, at Oyster, what we do is we have very clear about how we work together. What tools do we use? What are the rules of using these tools? We don't expect people to be always on connected. For instance, if I want to send a message to somebody, I don't expect an answer immediately. If I do, I will call them. And we also provide a lot of documentation. We treat internal documentation like customer documentation, and we have a team called Remote Work Experience that ensure that people can be very productive in being remote work. And it's also, what we also do is we try to create an environment that is more inclusive or differently inclusive than before, because you have now extroverts that are used to a lot of social interaction are at a disadvantage than introverts that are much more used to working alone. And I would say all of that doesn't matter if your company doesn't have a result-driven culture, an output-driven culture. Because for remote work to work, you need to not care about how many hours the person puts in to get the job done. What you care is about the output and the results. And that means that the company need to have the muscles to be able to have a clear expectation, clear goals, have a frequent objective and key result process to make sure that people understand what success look like and actually measure them on their success and not on anything else.
Yeah, and I believe that that's one of the major issues that people experienced, during this rush to remote, and then, the subsequent sort of return to work, whatever that looks like for people, is that, they seem to approach remote work with sort of like one toe in the water, right? Like, we're going to try this out rather than fully committing and trying to do it. Companies like yours that started out fully distributed from the jump, have a little bit of an advantage in those situations because I guess you've set your intention up front. You're ready to go in this manner, where companies that traditionally haven't been that way have got a big learning curve. And so I wonder, and what I wanted to sort of point out that with Oyster, you guys have a set of values that I think is really key. And I think they're really interesting too, because it sort of, I guess, is a practicing what you preach, so any company who is trying to become remote, or, even if they're going to go back into sort of a hybrid situation and need to take some care of their remote employees, if they were looking at the values that you've set forth at Oyster, I think there's some opportunity there to grow from these sort of core things. And the ones I wanted to point out specifically was joy from work. This idea that work should be a place that you go to be happy, I think is actually contrary to a lot of companies. I think a lot of people tend to think, you come to work for the sake of working. It's not our job to make you happy. You need to be happy somewhere else. And so I think that that's really great. I love the social impact, and we've discussed that a little bit. And then, as you were just describing, this idea of trust versus trust and transparency. And I think that those three things, especially, in addition to sort of the inclusion and diversity and just being, customer obsessive in general, I think all those could be things that other companies could strive to learn from if they were, struggling in any of those particular categories.
Yeah. So if you think about it, what are the value that are the foundation of successful companies in general? You cannot have successful companies and leadership without having trust and transparency. That's like a given value. You cannot have also success if you don't have high level of integrity and if you don't have customer centricity. I mean, these are like must-have values. What has changed is that whatever values companies need to have, now they need to add result-driven as also part of their values, because that result-driven culture becomes essential in a distributed environment, because you don't want to actually assess people on how many hours they put in or how they do the work or if they show up on Zoom. You want to really assess them on the output that they provide. And that goes a long way to create a strong culture of success and output, because people don't want to have confusion around that in a distributed environment. Obviously, they don't have confusion around of that in an office environment, but in a distributed environment, that becomes much more critical. It becomes a hygiene factor.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, as an extension of the trust idea, I think a lot of people think of trust as, you being honest or you being forthright in the things you're saying. But I think also that trust and that transparency comes from things like you're saying, the, hyper documentation, making sure that we've got, clarity around all these issues, and sort of, being able to give your employees autonomy while, making sure that they have clear rails to work within, right? I think for so many people, hard work is rewarding because you're trying to meet an objective at the end, right? Like you're working towards something. And I think if you just work hard and you're scattered all over the place and you don't really know where you're going, and you're not getting clarity from the company itself or from the top, well, then that's when you start getting problems where you're not happy at work. And that's when you start feeling unfulfilled at work. So I think you guys are doing a great job on that.
Yeah, and also if you think about building a trust and relationship, it's a foundation for success in any organization, especially as you go up in the hierarchy. But it's actually much harder to achieve in a distributed environment. And there's two reasons for that. One is because in a distributed environment, diversity is much higher. People come from all over the world, and they have divergent view of what trust is and what meaning of relationship is. And that will increase conflict in the team. So let me give you an example. Let's say you have one of your team member is from Sweden, the other one is from Netherlands, is Dutch. In Sweden, they have very special way of giving feedback. It's very actionable, but it's not direct. On the other hand, you have a Dutch colleague who is very direct and maybe sometimes blunt, with all good intention. So you start having conflict. So in an office, people have more chances to reconcile these differences. But in a distributed environment, these differences are non-moderated and non-mitigated. So you have to think about it anyway in the office, but here it becomes critical to solve. That's number one. Increasing diversity makes it really harder to build trust and relationship. The other one is lack of in-person interaction. And that's what lead actually this negative spiral that I spoke about earlier around management mistrust. So if managers are used to seeing their employees in the office, and now they don't, well, there's a mental adaptation that needs to happen. And if it doesn't happen, then they start micromanaging, and that kind of create this negative spiral that could really impair productivity.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think that maybe one thing we could segue off of there was this idea of feedback, right? One of the big things in remote work and working with a distributed team is, asynchronous communication versus synchronous communication. When should we meet in person versus when don't we have to? And again, I think that there's probably some clarity in your definitions of the different meeting types and things like that could probably help, drive some of those decisions. But with feedback in particular, I wondered if you had any thoughts about just sort of how that works, whether people, because you mentioned these cultural differences, and I wonder if there's a straightforward answer or if there's a good answer for how people ought to be giving feedback when you're working across cultures.
Yeah, I don't have a secret formula yet for that, but what I do recommend is that don't let it happen organically, in a sense that you want to have a framework that you embed in the company of how to give feedback and when and how frequent and what method, and anonymous versus non-anonymous. So you don't want to let this to chance. You want to really control it and foster it, because without a strong cultural feedback, a culture of feedback, then you really can't really improve much. So whatever your formula, have a formula.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And then to take that one step further, what is your take on in-person meetings or the role of sort of in-person time? I think, a lot of times when people hear sort of, I guess, what you would call remote work advocates speaking, they are often sort of seen as pushing for all remote all the time, right? But it's interesting, the more like remote companies I speak to and the more remote leaders I speak to, the in-person piece, there's still a pretty significant role there. So I wonder if you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so at Oyster, we are very prescriptive of the different type of meetings that we have and what to do to prepare for a meeting or for a synchronous communication, so it can be very effective. For me, synchronous meetings are critical in building trust and relationship, and you want to really do them purposely, so you can actually don't end up having a culture where trust and relationship are not as great as you want them to be. So what I do is actually in my team, in my exec team, we set up a frequent and recurrent synchronous check-in meeting with the goal to, so they're not reporting meetings. So essentially what I tell my team, I don't want you to report to me in that meeting. They are really about being there for my team, for the person, be able to see them, hear them, connect with them, and understand how they think, and also give them an opportunity to get inside my head and understand how I think, so we can remove a lot of these relationship uncertainty, and we get closer and closer connected together. These are what these meetings are, and I do them frequently. So I do them once a week with my direct reports, and I do them twice a month with my extended leadership. And we can really do them because all the reporting happens in advance. So I don't have to really ask them for an update. We have a structure and on the exec team to have an update every week. We use a lot of techniques such as recorded videos with Loom to do some of that. And so this is one example of how to use synchronous meeting to build trust and relationship that becomes really foundation in a distributed environment.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think too, is there something about, this trust or this clarity? You hear a lot of people talking about things like radical candor and, being sort of outwardly, honest in that sense. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit, about sort of your take on that. Like, I mean, is like being super radical about the way that you talk about everything, is that actually a good thing or a bad thing in your view?
My answer is it depends on the person, because some people are really happy to receive such a way, such a type of feedback. Others might actually don't like it and put them in a difficult position. And really the goal here is to really build a relationship and support the person. So you have to adapt your communication style to the person in front of you on Zoom or in person, because your goal as a leader is to enable them and make them successful. So that's why you have to be flexible. You have to have flexible communication style in order for you to be successful.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Just that idea of, it doesn't have to be all one way or the other. Rather read the room, understand who you're talking to. I think that makes a lot of sense. To continue on this path about sort of meetings and things like that, you mentioned, a lot of your reporting is done ahead of time. So you're able to spend this time, talking to each other. But how important, or like, what do you believe the role of the company is sort of in your teammates' happiness, I guess, so to speak? During the time of COVID, especially, you saw a rise in things like remote happy hours and things like this, where employers were really going out of their way to try and create social opportunities for their workers. And, being that, part of your core values are to create joy at work, I wonder if you would sort of talk about, what you believe the role of the employer is in sort of your employee happiness.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, the good news with remote work is that it creates more balanced individuals. And let me tell you what I mean by that. When we used to commute to work, we used to have this routine, this habit. We wake up in the morning, prepare, commute for an hour sometimes, and then spend 8 hours in the office and come back home. Our life was consumed by work and also our identity. So the overlap between who we are and what we do was much bigger when we used to go to the office. Now that we are working from anywhere, and many of us working from home, we have much more balanced identities. We are, like, for instance, talking about myself, for instance, I haven't spent as much time with my family as before, right? When I used to travel and work in an office. I haven't felt like I have a 10-month-old baby that was born during COVID. Like in between meetings, probably after this call with you, Ryan, I'm gonna go and spend some time with Mark, right? If I was in the office, I wouldn't have that opportunity. Another example is I feel also more connected to my community. Let me give you this example. I used to live a few months ago. I was we have a house in a small village in France. And my neighbor, Bernard, he's a 70-plus-year-old. He can't drive. His chimney broke in the middle of the winter. So he called me at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, asked me to give him a lift to the store and buy a piece of machinery for his chimney. I had 1 hour in between meetings, and I was able to go and help Bernard. I felt so connected to my local community. So as people's identity become more diverse than just work, everybody benefits, and their fulfillment in life increases and their happiness increases. So, which means that as a company, you want to allow that. You want to promote that. You want to foster that. You want to be the role example as a leader that can do that for your team. So that's one example of what we mean by joy in the work.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's, sort of contrary to the industrial revolution version of work, right? Where people are spending 80% of their time at work. And, I may be at my age, I might be on a little bit of a cusp between generations of the way that we handled work and our freedom. And so there is a little bit of that, daily grind kind of thing for me where I'll sit down and I'll work. And unfortunately, because of it, I don't stop and take the time to, go for a jog or whatever, and I work for myself and have for 20 years. It's my own fault if I'm not doing it. But it is interesting how it's just sort of been beaten into me that this is how we do business. And so I just work and work and work and work. And so
that's the assumption. That's the assumption we've had, right? We've inherited that assumption from the Industrial Revolution that continued through the office era. And now with knowledge work becoming the de facto main modality of work, again, 1.5 billion knowledge workers coming to the world for the next 10 years. That's going to be the biggest type of work we ever do as a species. And it's time to reinvent what that means.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think too, what I really like about it is this idea that you as an employee or as an employer are sort of encouraging your people to go out and do these things for themselves, take the time to do that. And in a world where you're not tied to sort of hourly, hours in, hours out sort of output versus you're, measuring things by KPIs or reaching goals or whatever it is, this output based format. It's interesting that you're given that latitude. I looked at a lot of these, virtual happy hours and things like that as sort of an insecure cry by companies to keep you on the clock, right? Like, how do we keep control of our employees just an extra hour after work or whatever during these little happy hours? Instead, what it sounds like anyway is that you're rather pushing people, go ahead, run your kids to school, take a little time for yourself, maybe go for a run, then come back and do a little work or whatever you need to do to get your project done and meet your objectives. But it's not going to be this idea that you must work 8 or 10 hours today in order to accomplish that task. I guess unless the task requires that.
And think about the, let's say, gender diversity you can have on the team because if you have this flexible way of addressing work. Probably 45% of my exec team are women. When was a tech company you've seen that has very, very few tech companies today have that level of gender diversity in the exec team?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And even if you take it down to sort of the worker level, I can just kind of look at our situation during COVID. My wife was a school teacher and she was teaching online. I have 2 boys and they were both home doing school online. In years past, if the kids were sick, she would take the day off and come home and care for the kids. It's just sort of, maybe it's kind of a traditional way of doing things. But, during COVID, it was all hands together. We were all unified on this front, so if somebody was sick, then mom and dad are both taken care of. And we had that opportunity because we were home together. So even though, luckily I've been a remote worker for a long time, so I have a good setup here at our house and lucky to be here in the States where we have, big houses and some real estate because it would have been really hard to get through it. I look at, we have a small team in Barcelona and those guys, they live in their little flats and they're in a very social community that, they need to be out and seeing one another. And so I think COVID was much more difficult for them than it was for our family, for example.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I wanted to, I guess, maybe transition a little bit into a little bit more about what Oyster does and why they do it. So can we talk a little bit about some of the challenges that are associated with hiring abroad?
Yeah. So if you're a company and you found Mary in Greece that you want to hire her, she's a great talent and you add her to your team. The first question that comes to mind is, how are you going to do it? Do you need to set up an entity in Greece? Or do you want to hire as a contractor? And is it legal to hire as a contractor? Aren't you taking like a compliance risk to hire as a contractor in Greece? And so there is one option one, which is setting up an entity. That's probably a multi-month process, and you need to find a local lawyer, local accountant. right? To understand what kind of benefits you want to provide to Mary in Athens. Or you can take a risk and go the contractor way, and you could risk a very hefty fine from the government. But you also need to consider that maybe Mary don't want to be a contractor. And Mary wants to have the stability of a full-time employment. She wants to have her taxes being paid. She wants to benefit from local social security. Actually, in Greece, it's pretty generous. I think it's like 45% of the salary goes to paying all these social safety nets. So in order for you then to be attractive as an employer for Mary, you want to be able to offer her these benefits. So this is kind of the problem we solve for our customers, that you don't have to set up an entity anywhere in the world to employ this great talent that you found. You don't have to take the risk to hire as a contractor. We actually have set up a number of entities around the world and created software infrastructure on top that enables you to go online and submit Mary as an employee in Greece, and then we would actually employ her on your behalf, offer her a great employment contract, great local benefits, and then she can start working for you on next Monday, instead of waiting for months and taking that risky path. So that's kind of the problem we solve. The problem we solve is that we enable companies to easily and with confidence to tap into the global talent pool and hire the best no matter where they are.
So with your platform, this idea of tapping into the global talent pool, I mean, do you actually assist in helping people find these people worldwide, or is it simply well, I shouldn't say simply because it's very complex, but do you just handle the business side of the business? So these people would go out and find their own, Mary in Athens, but you would actually facilitate the handshake between them.
Yeah, the customer come to us when they found Mary and they don't know what to do, right? So we help them to figure out how to employ her compliantly and give her a great experience so that she's treated like a first-class employee.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And so as it goes with, cultural conflicts, language barriers, things like that, I mean, how much of that burden, does the Oyster team manage, I guess? I mean, obviously, do you have to have native speakers in Greece to be able to do the work in Greece? How does all that work?
Yeah, so we have our people concierge service that is, think of them as your outsourced HR. So from one hand, they talk to you as a customer in your own language. And from the other hand, they talk to Mary in Greece or anywhere in the world, local labor law and local payroll regulation, whatever is needed. So we are that adapter between you as a globally distributed company, regardless if, let's say, you're US based or European based or whatever, and then with your local employee to make sure that they have a great local HR experience. And that's one of the challenges I faced in my previous company, where we would have all the good intention to provide Diego in Argentina a great employment experience, but with all the good intention, we would not have the experience or the knowledge of local employment in Argentina, right? It would be every day we would discover something new, and it would make mistakes, and we would pay the payroll late, and we didn't factor in that there is 13 months in Argentina that you have to pay them, not 12 months, and suddenly it's much more expensive than we thought it is. And then, so all of that kind of unknown territory, will be taken care of by our people concierge service that is here and available for both the customer and their team members around the world.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's terrific. So there's I guess one big motivator, looking for incentive for hiring people abroad. For example, I mean, we talk about this global talent pool. Obviously, there are very talented people all over the world, and many times they don't have the opportunity to go for a position or something. But I know that a lot of times companies, do go to these different parts of the world to maybe try and save a little money, things like that. And I wondered if we could just sort of talk as a topic on this idea of sort of equal pay for equal work. Like I mentioned before, I come from the design world, and in our world, it's not uncommon for people to use platforms, like Upwork and Elance and some of these kinds of things, where you can go out and hire a guy in New Delhi and pay him $6 an hour to do the same kind of graphic design you're paying somebody in San Francisco $300 an hour for. And so, and of course there's a range in skills and all kinds of stuff, right? I mean, but just as an example, people go to these parts of the world to save money. A platform like yours that actually enables this great experience, is there I guess, any equality in sort of, to be had in sort of the equal pay for equal work kind of realm. Like, I just wonder, if people are leveraging remote work, as a way to actually help people versus bargain shopping.
Yeah. So our mission is the goal. One of the goals of our mission is that 10 years from now, pick an average country in terms of pay. Just pick one that's Romania, let's say, and we want the whole world to look like Romania. Okay, for an equal job and equal seniority and expertise. That's kind of our 10 years goal. Now to get there are some challenges to go through, because today we still live in an unequal world, both in terms of pay, but also skill set. If you think about it, if you want to hire a tech company exec team that had experience in, let's say, hyper growth SaaS companies in the past, they don't exist outside the Western world today. Okay, so we have to build that next generation of certain skill set that don't exist other than in the Western world, and we have 10 years to get there. And secondly, there's also pay philosophy is also very company specific, and so you have and there's tons of research on this already, but you have companies like Spotify that said, we want to pay everyone the same salary as equivalent of a salary in San Francisco, no matter where you are in the world. And why they did that? Because they have deep pockets, and they want to attract the best and the brightest anywhere in the world. Other companies such as Facebook take the opposite view. They say, well, no, if you want to relocate to a new country or a new region in the US, then you're probably going to take a pay cut. So I think what's going to happen is that over time, from here till 10 years, we're going to see, as we remove these barriers to cross-border employment, and as the talent in emerging economies start actually increase in certain categories that are needed in the West, then we're going to see that there is some sort of equilibrium that's going to happen over time, where Muhammad in Egypt versus, let's say Muhammad in Egypt has a local sales job in tech in Egypt. He's paid $10,000 per year versus the same job in San Francisco is paid $100,000 a year. In 2 years from now, Muhammad will be paid $20,000. In 5 years, he'll be paid maybe $40,000. And then over time, you increase the pay of Muhammad in Egypt, so you can get to some sort of equilibrium in the world. It's unlikely that salaries in the Bay Area will go down. I mean, we'll see, but what we want is we want to lift everybody up, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. And there's this guy, his name's Andy Triba. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he has this concept of a thing called the cloud wage that I thought was sort of intriguing. I don't know how this works, economically speaking. I'm not an economist, but it basically is this concept that, let's say a website is going to cost you $150,000. So this project is worth $150,000 and it lives up here in the cloud. And whether you're in Bangladesh or you're in New York City, you can apply for this project. And if you happen to be the most qualified and win the project, well, you get paid $150,000, whatever, regardless of where you are, right? We're not judging you based on where you were born or where you happen to live. And I think that, now granted, I don't know how that works in an economic sense, right? If all of a sudden your web developers are raking in giant sums of money in the middle of Bangladesh, like what does that do to an economy? But in principle, I really like that idea of sort of equality, and
it would be great.
Yeah, well, I can't imagine it would hurt, right? But I mean, I wonder if sort of the gap between the wealth and those without, I wonder if that becomes larger and then becomes problematic. And so, theoretically, I guess people, they could invest more in their communities, they could build bigger businesses, they could, so exactly. Maybe they're putting people to work. Like it seems good, but
the idea, Ryan, is that that software developer in Delhi, he or she got a great job at a hyper growth tech company in the West for a few years. They're going to learn how tech works. They're going to learn how venture-backed companies work, and some of them will start the next generation of tech companies in their local countries, and then we start breaking that that cycle of Silicon Valley. Only great companies in tech can be created in Silicon Valley, right? I mean, I think that's already broken, by the way, from what happened in the last year. But I think we have an opportunity in a few years from now to bring in, entrepreneurship and innovation to any part of the world, and that's part of our mission.
Yeah, no, I love that. Well, and I think that that's right. I mean, sort of those, the sort of the characteristics of the entrepreneur, the person who would want to build something, for the betterment of other people, so they can put people to work and generate, value in a given geography. I think those characteristics, as they sort of trickle down out of Silicon Valley and onto, the world stage, as they've already begun to, but, as they start to get into these, farther reaching parts of the world, I think you will see a lot of positive growth. So as we're starting to get to the end of the show here, I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of just what you think is going to happen given this sort of return to work. Obviously the hardcore remote advocates are saying, hey, let's stay remote. You've been remote. It's been working. It hasn't been. I'm sure there are leaders and companies out there going, remote didn't work for us. We need to go back to the office. We need to hurry back. And so I wonder if you just had any thoughts about sort of what the future might have in store for remote work, and then how that affects sort of Oyster's mission, right? I mean, obviously you guys are helping distributed teams, but presumably you could help hybrid teams as well. How do you see that going?
Yeah, I see the world being hybrid, and with the caveat that even if you're a hybrid, you have to act and behave like a distributed company so that you can make everybody successful, no matter where they are. And why I say that, because first, why I think it's hybrid, because now that employees have tasted this additional degree of freedom, which is location, now they can do the work from anywhere. And they realize actually that many of them were able to deliver a great job by being from anywhere. It's going to be hard for them to go back to the office. And many of them say, okay, I'll resign if you force me to go back to the office, which means that companies that want to keep attracting the best talent in the world will have to offer them the opportunity to work from anywhere. But it's not enough. They also need to offer them the opportunity to be successful working from anywhere. And that's different. And that's why they need to adopt the best practices and a leadership style that is much more enabling for a distributed workforce. To give an example, like if all your exec team are in one place, and if being promoted in the company is really about connecting with and having coffees and drinks with your exec team, then this is where it's not going to work for you, because the best person, if they are not able to come to the office, or they don't want to come to the office every day and be with the exec team, won't have that opportunity to grow. They're going to leave and join another company. So the future is hybrid, and the future is distributed culture and distributed leadership, because the company that can have both will be the company that's going to be able to attract the best talent and become the winners of tomorrow.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think just the concept that it could be any way, all one way or all the other, I think is just wrong. I think hybrid is probably the way it goes. And I think that, that's sort of been a theme throughout this conversation, right? It can't be all one or the other. It requires, a leader must be flexible, your work must be flexible, but what I do like is that you put that caveat on the, it's not just about remote work, but it's about being successful in remote work. And I think that little bit of intention might be the difference between the company that's, okay, fine, you can work from home this week, or, you work every other day in the office or something. The person who's just kind of throwing in their towel versus the person who is, actively figuring out how to make this work great for their company.
Exactly.
So cool. So here at the end of the pod, I wonder if you could just sort of tell people where they can learn a little bit more about you, if they wanted to connect with you online, if they had interest in learning more about Oyster, engaging there.
Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn. So Tony Jamous, I'm available on LinkedIn. And if you want to learn more about Oyster, you can go to oysterhr.com.
Yeah, and I would just encourage anybody who has the opportunity to check out the Oyster HR website. They do have published there a downloadable PDF where you can go and check out sort of the whole mission and their sort of social impact statement. And I think that's really incredible. For me anyway, that stands out among other sort of, businesses in this space and other remote companies. I think the way they're handling that is really great. So thanks so much, Tony, for doing the show. Grateful to have this time to make a conversation with you, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ryan, for having me on the show.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes in this week and every week, and we'll see you all next time.
I don't owe you anything. I don't owe you anything.